Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Happier Active. I'm Ellie, I'm the host. This week I spoke to Katerina Pavlakis, who does intuitive cooking. It's really fascinating, and you'll know if you've listened to other episodes that I'm really interested in food and helping people have better relationships with food and their intuition, and kind of really getting in touch with their bodies and how things affect them, and making kind of slow changes and kind of slowing down. So intuitive cooking really kind of taps into that, and it's really an interesting way to start thinking about cooking and food and community. And so it was a really interesting conversation, and it's a really great way to start improving your relationship with food and ingredients, especially if you're someone who's not necessarily like super confident cooking, or finds it hard to make time, or all those things that are really difficult in modern life. And this is a really interesting approach to solving some of those problems and bringing more kind of joy to the food and cooking, and therefore life. So you can imagine it's right up my street. I did mention in this that we've been making some quite weird recipes because we are hoping to move. And so we're trying to, finish things that are in the freezer and the pantry. I think that move might be quite close now. We've had some quite good news that we're progressing on that front, which is very exciting. So I'll keep you all updated with that as it kind of unfolds over the next kind of 4 or 5 weeks. And I've got kind of an exciting double episode for while I'm moving that I can put out so that I don't, so that I can concentrate on the move, and still keep up with the podcast. So that's quite exciting, I think. And apart from that, I'm gonna let you get on and enjoy this episode. So there are many ways to find your path to better health and happiness, and what works is highly individualised. My philosophy is that most people are more likely to find that if they're active participants in their own journey. So this is a space to start exploring some of the rich and varied areas in which people practice, so you can start thinking about what resonates with you and discover new or different practices to either start or deepen your health practices. And today I have Katerina Pavlakis, who does intuitive cooking, which is really interesting. So welcome, and why don't you tell us a bit about what you do?
Hello, Ellie, and thank you for getting me on the podcast. I'm really happy to be here to talk about, your own approach with everything. In this case, I'm really all about that cooking is so much more easy and so much more enjoyable if you do it your way. And just as, our taste buds are all very individual and we all have different tastes, also our way of making something good to eat can be very, or should be very individualized. But I think I find that modern food culture has really shifted way over to the other side, where we all, meant to be following the recipe, and the measure of being a good cook or not is like how much of a complicated recipe can you follow exactly or not. So and I find this a bit strange, because like 200 years ago people weren't following recipes. Yes, they were writing down recipes, but those old recipes, they're just like memory aids. They kind of list an approximate, quantity of ingredients, and then you are to cook it or bake it until it's done. And these kind of recipes where everything is written out to the gram is a very new thing. And where should I start? I just grew up cooking like that because in my family we were cooking like that. Just, throw in a bit of this and a bit of that, and out comes a nice meal. And it was only when I moved to London in my 20s and I was thrown into the cult of the recipe that it kind of almost kind of bashed my own confidence. Like, okay, I can't follow a recipe for the life of me, so I must be a bad cook.
Yeah.
But, people eating my food always like it. So what's going on here? And I think the next kind of step was when 10 years ago, I left London and I'm now in a tiny, tiny rural town in North Wales. So it's all about farmers and hippies out here. And I started running a whole food shop with my husband. So for the last 10 years, I've been talking to people about food and recipes and ingredients. And have you got this? Oh no. And what am I going to do if I can't find this? And all these things that I started realizing how people are really tripped up by recipes and how this food culture has somehow robbed us of that confidence that I think as humans, making something good to eat is an instinct.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no other animal that cooks. Animals do amazing things, but no animal, not even chimpanzees, only humans cook. And so cooking makes us human. So surely we all have an instinct there. And intuitive cooking is therefore more about unlearning all the shoulds and all the do's and don'ts that we have internalized and just learn to trust that our own taste buds and our own taste, our own memories of what we like and what we don't like, that's enough to guide us to make something good to eat.
Yeah, and it can start really small. So my husband, when he started doing a lot more cooking, and he wasn't very confident, so he liked having the recipes. He's an engineer, right? So he likes having a list of instructions written down. And in the pandemic, we got a smoker and he got really into making rubs and things for the meat. And it was funny, the point where I said to him, I think you've become an actual cook now, is that he makes up his own ones, or he'd be like, oh, actually, I didn't like, there was too much of this flavour, so I'm going to play with, and then I'm like, oh, you finally graduated to thinking about what you like about this and what you didn't like and tweaking it. But I can see to start with, he needed something to follow, and then once he had the confidence, he was like, oh, now we can start playing, and it's much more fun.
Well, exactly, because it becomes exactly this, what you say. You start playing with the flavors, and even the experiments that maybe are not so successful, as you said, your husband says, oh, that was too much of that or not enough of this. Kind of just noticing and remembering and then doing it differently next time. That is all we need. And as far as structure goes, when I sat down and thought, okay, I think this is, maybe of value to share this. And I really think it's a skill. It's not a talent.
Yeah.
We all have taste buds. Therefore, we all can cook. I thought, okay, if you want to teach this, you really have to think about, how you're going to verbalize it, how you're going to put a structure in this. So I actually had to sit down and think, okay, what is it what I do when I seemingly throw this and that in a pan? Because it's not random. It's just mostly unconscious.
Yeah.
So I actually sat down and I thought, oh, that's what I'm doing. This is the kind of pattern that runs in the background. And I started, boiling it all down to a handful of patterns. And then you think, oh gosh, actually, 90% of recipes are based on this handful of patterns. And you can even, when you start seeing the patterns, you can then look at any recipe and simplify it in your head, because if you can see the pattern, you start understanding why something is there or why something is not there, and how you can replace it. So yes, you do need some patterns to start practicing, so you're not completely lost. And I think this is what I teach.
Yeah, and I think it's some of that thing, isn't it, of instead of being like, oh, I can't make that because I don't, it's like a broccoli pasta or whatever, and I don't have the broccoli, you can be like, all right, well, what vegetable have I got that we could just put in instead? And having the confidence to be like, I can still follow the basics of this, but swap some things, or I don't like this ingredient, so instead of not doing it, we can change for something similar or that will do the same thing.
Exactly, and you said it there yourself. It's all common sense in the end. Like if you want to swap something, just spend, a couple of seconds of thinking about, what does it do and what does it taste like?
Yeah.
Is it adding liquid? Is it adding bulk? Is it adding crunchiness? And, does it taste kind of salty-ish or sweet-ish? Or, it's all obvious things that we can think about. And then, well, what if I replaced it with something similar? More or less similar, and then the result will be more or less similar. It will not be exactly the same, that's definitely sure, but even if you follow the recipe exactly to the gram, if you cooked it on 2 different days, it still wouldn't be the same, because food is alive.
Yeah.
It's not a static thing. Or maybe it is a static thing when it comes from a factory, and we have sort of come to believe that this is how it should be. But actually, this is just an idea that comes from the processed food industry, that things are the same and repeatable and reliable. Well, tomatoes or chickens or lemons are not. They're out there, they're growing, and they're all different.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because I think especially people who eat a lot of processed food have really lost the connection with what the ingredients actually are. Sometimes when I work with people and you're having to really start with basics for cooking, because they really don't cook anything that's starting with a whole ingredient. All their cooking is starting with things in packets.
Yes, and I don't think we can blame the people, because for decades it has been, cooking has been portrayed as an inconvenience that, the industry and the experts are helping us overcome. So, as if cooking is kind of like the obstacle to eating, and we're trying to get it out of the way as quickly as possible with as many shortcuts as possible. The ultimate shortcut being, getting it ready-made, either out of a packet or, from down a phone line that you've ordered, which is a real shame, because, even in terms of what it does to our body, I'm sure you will know that the act of cooking is preparing our body for the act of digesting.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're enjoying the smells and the flavors while you're cooking is getting all the digestive juices going, so that you then, well, get more out of your food, metaphorically as an enjoyment, but also kind of, down to the molecules that you're going to absorb.
Yeah, and it comes back to that intuition thing. Like, if you're involved in the process of making it, you're much more likely to notice in your body what it's doing to you and what you're enjoying and what you're not enjoying, because you're more in touch with it, I guess.
And that's that, isn't it? I think even this whole recipe culture has removed us from being in touch with what is happening in front of you, like in your pot. Like, a lot of people in my workshops will ask, well, how do I know how much to add or how long to cook it when it's done, or if I'm not being told by the recipe? And all you need to do is to look at your food and look at your pot and look what's happening in your pot, and maybe you can see how the color is changing of your greens from, dark green to bright green to dull green. Or you'll notice how the smell is changing, even how, the sound of the sizzling is changing. But we have to kind of stop and take that time to notice. But it doesn't take that much. If you're going to be cooking anyway, you can just as well spend the time noticing what's happening in your pot and tasting it and tweaking it, rather than trying to stick to the recipe. Because I think this whole idea that we don't have enough time to cook, I mean, it's true, we don't have enough time for anything these days, but a lot of the time that is being taken up by cooking is this mental space of planning it and thinking about it and worrying about it and being frustrated by not being able to follow the recipe because you're missing something, and all that sort of mind clutter. Because if you learn to cook with what you have in the fridge, and you learn which few things you should always keep in your pantry. And you can then, throw together a meal anytime out of with anything. Then you just open the fridge and start cooking. So you haven't wasted already half an hour worrying about it.
Yeah, we have set a sort of stock of certain things, but actually at the moment we're getting ready to move house, so we're trying to wind down the freezer, and so we're having a lot of creative cooking at the moment, because you think, oh, what's this? We're going to this is what we're starting with, because that's coming out of the freezer today, and then so it might be like a bit of meat where we've bought a big bit and cut some off and chucked it in, or a bit of something that, like before my daughter was born, we did a lot of meal prep, so we'll find a bit of that and then be like, right, that's the base of the beginning. Now what's in the cupboard to go with it? Or it's quite fun.
Well, exactly, that's that word again, right? It's fun. It just makes it fun when you allow yourself to be creative. And you have to allow yourself. If you don't give yourself permission, if you don't dare to just trust yourself, then it's going to feel restrictive and not very much fun at all. But when you allow yourself to play with it, and to maybe cook meals that are not, don't have a name. And if your kid absolutely wants a name, I've heard that from clients, that, their kids sort of don't like those no-name meals, possibly because, they don't know what to expect. But, make up a name. Why not? So we have this idea of a spag bol is a spag bol, and it's cooked in that certain way, and every other way is kind of not a spag bol, or anyway, it's wrong. So I think the more open we allow ourselves to be with that, the easier it gets, and the more flexible it gets, and therefore it also gets more fun.
Yeah, and so something I was just thinking of then, we made a chili, I can't remember when it was a few months ago, and I think we'd got halfway through cooking it and realised we didn't have any kidney beans. So my husband was like, I'm just going to put some baked beans in, because we've got some, just for the texture or whatever. And then he decided, he was like, oh, actually I really like this, and so now when he makes it, he always puts both in. But it's kind of funny how in that kind of creative thing you can find things that are a bit untraditional or not like the correct way, and then it turns out that you like that, and that becomes part of your like family recipe or whatever.
Well, exactly. And, there is this saying that, there are as many recipes as there are cooks.
Yeah.
So, there is a reason for that. And very often with, very traditional dishes, you'll read in cookbooks or in travel books, every family has their own recipe. Yet, if you take it out of that context, it's like the competition of who has the most authentic recipe for, this, that, or the other. And, it's like the folk police. And I'm just getting this sort of music kind of parallel here, because in a previous life I was a music producer. The like kind of, again, those people who like to point out how this folk song or that folk song is being played the wrong way, as if music is just as much a living tradition as cooking is, and probably as most things that humans do. So yeah, and one mistake may turn out to be a delicious surprise.
And then you can find, well, actually you're Greek originally, from Greece originally, right? Or
yes, I grew up in Greece, but I grew up in a bilingual family because my mum is German. Okay. So I actually grew up in the middle of a cultural clash. So I think I already grew up with that notion that there is no any one proper way of doing things, because there were always at least two things for doing things, and my family was doing a different thing yet. So
that's really interesting, because Greek, everyone I know who's Greek or I've ever met, it's a lot of that kind of cooking that's like a family, it's like an event, right? You have the big kind of outdoor cooking where people come, and there's a lot of things on a grill, and it's a lot of, I think, the oral tradition for the people that I know in terms of passing on recipes and teaching it, and it's a community thing. culturally.
Yes, I think in Greece, there's sort of I don't know, I don't want to call it I think in Greece, home cooking is still a lot more alive than most places in Europe. And funnily enough, you can see this if you look at percentages of processed food bought. And in Europe, I'm sure Britain is like by far is almost as high as the United States. And then, I don't know, 20 points down is Germany. And like, I think in Britain is like over 50%, Germany is like 35%. And the last two countries on the list is Greece and Portugal. And they have just over 10% of processed food sold. Yeah. Which, is just an indication of how much cooking is still, and cooking at home is still an everyday part of life. But even in Greece, I mean, these days, this kind of, maybe not so much packaged foods, but food delivery is definitely massive in Greece now. So obviously there are people who are cooking less. And of course, it's true that if everybody in the family is working full time, there is very little time. I mean, I don't want to diminish this, but I think there are ways to cook simple, good food that is, fit for everyday life. And I think that's what I'm really about. It's about everyday cooking. If you're cooking for a dinner party or for Christmas or something like that, by all means, push out the boat and make it complicated and fancy if you like, although I'm also convinced that your guests will enjoy a big pot of chili just as much as some sort of fancy souffle.
Yes, because it's the community that people want, really. I remember reading that study that people always put out about, Mediterranean diets, and then when they look into it and they're like, oh, I can't quite work out why it's... Initially, they couldn't work out why people were living so much longer when, on paper, the diet wasn't necessarily brilliant. There's a lot of red wine. And then when they've done more studying, it's a lot about community, because when people are doing that, they're sitting around longer, having a glass of wine at the end of dinner and talking. And that's actually what's part of what's creating the longer lives, because people aren't as lonely when they're older, because there's like a culture of sitting together and eating. And that's as important, the kind of community of food.
Yeah, the sharing of food, I think, is really what makes food special. Not that it's, you cannot enjoy sort of a meal for one, but sharing of food is what makes it wonderful. And I always feel, I'm sort of a very sort of introverted person. And I always feel really awkward at sort of parties or events. But if I can sit around a dinner table with people around, then that's when that's where I feel comfortable in this kind of situation. I don't know why that is, but sharing food is I think a big thing of the wonder that is making food. And, and it's, again, a very human thing. Like 200 years ago, if you didn't cook or somebody did not cook for you, you didn't eat, basically. These days, cooking is totally optional, but it wasn't always that way. And communal cooking, where the whole village comes to, I don't know, slaughter a pig, and then everybody gets something, or families like in Greece, where several generations are still living together very often, and then cooking is a thing that brings the family together.
Yeah. And it's funny because we know that in the like big celebrations, like you were saying Christmas, and over here like Thanksgiving and those kind of things, and people do like it, and what they like about it is the meal where everyone's together and having that. That's what people talk about. So we do know it, we've just kind of forgotten it in our day-to-day lives a bit, I think, sometimes.
And it's about priorities, really. Is it about saying, I want to make the family meal an important thing in my family life, therefore you're going to plan everything around that? Or are you just gonna say, there's something in the fridge, help yourself whenever you come home. And but sharing a meal is really a wonderful opportunity to come together and share, I don't know, share your day and connect with your children, connect with your partner. I don't have children, but in our house, our dinner time with my husband is like our favorite time of the day. And, we're running around doing all sorts of things all day, but sharing our dinner and chatting over dinner about, anything and everything is how we connect.
Yeah, and I think when you can prioritize that, and we don't manage it every day because we're both busy, but when we do, and what we try and do is, even when we've both been busy and we've got things to do afterwards, is kind of make that half hour or 45 minutes pretty fixed, and then if we have to go off afterwards and carry on. But it makes a nice point in the day where you're concentrating on something other than work and housework and whatever else is going on.
Yeah, exactly. So, is dinner something you want to get out of the way to start your evening, whatever that is, or is dinner actually the evening?
Yeah. And the bit you're looking forward to. So when you do classes, I'm interested in how you get people started. Are you just giving people like a pile of ingredients?
I think how I start is by talking about these patterns. And the simplest way of looking at a meal, or, the anatomy of a meal, as I like to call it, is, a meal is built in layers. And the first layer, the base layer, usually involves onions of some form. This is why the vast majority of recipes start with that thing, chop an onion.
Yeah.
So, and that is not because you want your dish and every dish to taste of onions. This is, your base layer that gives you like a foundation of background depth of flavor, and then you start building on that. And there are a lot of formulas out there. I don't know, take a grain and a protein and a vegetable to kind of, there's your meal. But this is kind of insisting on ingredients, and I'm trying to get people to see these layers separate from ingredients, so that you could play with any kind of ingredient in any kind of layer to just keep things flexible. And once I started to think about layers, I also realized that building flavor, the anatomy of flavor, is actually happening in layers as well. And, if you think about when something tastes like a bit boring, it's because it's one-dimensional, it's flat. And when flavor is exciting, you have a lot of layers, a lot of complexity going on there, like, a good glass of wine. And this is why maybe cultures that use a lot of bold flavors, that we then think, oh gosh, whatever Thai food is so exciting, because there is this riot of flavors and contrasts going on there. And I think that is another important step to think of how you build the flavor at the same time as you're building your meal, and possibly even more important, because, a meal worth eating is a meal that's tasty. It doesn't have to be an out of this world, the best thing I ever ate meal every day, but you want something tasty. So if you can just start thinking of building your meal in layers, that is, the basic guide you need. So this is how I get people started. And then, there is vague guidelines of, the base layer usually will contain onions, but sometimes spices, sometimes celery, sometimes aromatics like that. And the main body of the dish contains, most everything else. It might contain meat or pulses or tomato or red wine or vegetables, not or, but and all of these things together. And then you have the top layer, which is like, the shadow and light, the flourishes, where you can get to tweak and and really bring to life the flavors you already have. And you may think of that, oh, it's just a garnish, but it isn't. You know, if you put a knob of butter on at the end, or a squeeze of lemon, or a handful of herbs, it really makes a difference to the experience. So, and I think if you just start with this basic concept of layers and then look at your ingredients and think, okay, I think that bit I'm going to fit in the base layer, and that bit all goes in the middle, and then I can, do some play with some flavors on the top layer, and I think that's what you need. The rest is practice, tasting, and trusting yourself, and doing it again, and understanding that really you can't break it. We all are so afraid of the disasters in the kitchen.
Yeah.
But, if you think about it, the two most common disasters, the one thing is to burn something. Okay, but that doesn't make you a bad cook. That just makes you a distracted cook.
Mm-hmm. And that happens to everyone at some point. Even Michelin star chefs are going to do that at some point.
Yes, and and my only advice on this is, if you are not absolutely sure that you can give things your full attention, just turn down the heat. The hotter something is, the more the point between burned and not burned is just really going to be a few seconds. So, but if you cook things on a sort of lower heat, you have more time. And don't get distracted.
Yeah.
When you're going to cook, then cook. When you're going to chop the onion, as the Buddhists say. and the other disaster is just bland food. And the bland food happens because you didn't dare to play with flavor, and you didn't trust your taste buds more than the recipe. Because obviously there are some fantastic cooks and chefs with recipes that have real personality. But, the vast majority of the billions of recipes out there in the internet is really middle of the road, because it tries to please everyone. But you are not everyone. Your taste buds are your taste buds, and you have a specific taste. So, even if you're following a recipe, I would encourage everyone to just taste it. And if you think it needs a bit more of something, a bit more brightness, a bit more saltiness, a bit more oomph, I don't know, you decide, then by all means, like your husband decided with his meat rubs, to tweak them, taste and tweak. That's all there is. You don't need anything else to cook something tasty. Taste and tweak. And, to have a few ingredients in your pantry that are there to save the day.
Yeah. I tell you something that's quite interesting. About this kind of depth of flavour, the only thing that I ask people to bring when they come to visit us in the US from the UK is paprika, because they make it with a different pepper here, and it just tastes slightly different. But it's that thing of like a lot of, one of the things I make as like a comfort food is like a spicy tomato pasta sauce. And it tastes completely different if the paprika is US made with whatever pepper they use. And so it doesn't hit the spot in the same way. And it's really funny because people always say, what can I bring? And I think they're expecting me to say, tea bags or Marmite or whatever. And I was like, paprika. Just like as much as you can bring. Because one of the things I use a lot, because I love it, but it just does taste slightly different here. And so I need because that's like one of those ingredients that I really love in tomato-based sauces.
And I think you're hitting on another really important thing there, which is how much food and flavors are connected to memories. And yeah, for you or for me or for anyone, certain things only taste right if they taste a certain way.
Yeah.
So maybe that is that special paprika. On the other hand, obviously, you could also allow for the possibility to do a different tomato sauce that, may also be enjoyable. It will never hit that spot unless it kind of fits the memory. But, that is the other thing, all tomato sauces, they are all versions of each other. And to recognize that, and we can then decide which version may be our favorite, or which version may fit our current cravings, or which version may fit our current, I don't know, availability of time.
Yeah.
So, if you only have 20 minutes, there is no point in sort of trying to make a ragu that needs to be simmering for 2 hours, and then getting frustrated because you don't have the time. You can make a fresh tomato sauce with, fresh tomatoes that only need 10 minutes of simmering and are still crunchy, for example. Of course, it will be different. I'm not saying it's the same, but I'm saying there is all these versions, and we can sort of maybe allow to be open that we may like different things, or we may like the chili with the baked beans in.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. I think when we were talking about people with different taste, and one of the things that we found really helpful was like not always eating exactly the same thing. So like most of what we eat will be the same, but like it's reduced a lot of friction house if like I want a different vegetable or something, so I'll make myself an extra bit to go with dinner that I know my husband won't really like, and it makes it, and then we both really enjoy it. Or if he wants something a lot spicier, then he'll add the spice to his bit and not mine, and that kind of, and I think feeling free to be flexible about even individual meals can really help, because I find a lot of the time people are like, oh, but I would like to have this, but no one else in the house wants to eat that, or these kind of tensions, and then people aren't eating what they want because of other people.
Yes, and I think in many families it seems to have sort of gone that way, that every person is having a different meal, where you could have versions of the same meal that then, fits different tastes. And I think kind of those kind of meals where like component meals are very easy to use in that way, like a rice bowl where you put different toppings on, or a wrap or tacos where you have different fillings, and that kind of thing where you actually get to have the fun thing that everyone can choose the different things that are available.
Yeah, and actually I was just thinking, when you were saying about the garnishes, I was thinking like you could, with something like boiled potatoes, you could have them 3 nights in a row and they'd be completely different if you put, like you said, a bit of lemon on it or butter on it one day. Or if you have family who don't like one or other of those things, it'd be quite easy to just make them and then have people put their own garnish on it. You can, those kind of ways where it totally changes the vibe of what it is that you're eating, but without really any effort.
Exactly. And this is also a great way to work with leftovers. So if you say, oh gosh, I don't want to eat this tomato sauce 3 times in a row, but if you have the tomato sauce once on pasta, and once you stick some beans in and it's going to be a chili, and then the third time you're going to use the leftovers of a chili and some tacos or something, that gives you a really different eating experience, even though you cooked something only once.
Yeah, we actually do a lot of that, and that's how we do our quick weekday meals. So we'll quite often cook something big on a Sunday with the idea that we can use it in 3 or 4 different ways for quick dinners in the week. And that we found that really helpful to like still have really good home cooking, but have that need for sometimes like a 10-minute meal on a Monday.
Well, exactly. And it doesn't, when you're using it as a base for different meals, it doesn't mean that you're eating the same thing all week.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like it in the same way. Which once we kind of unlocked a few of those. And again, because I think you can fall in the pattern of then being like, oh, that works, and then do it the next week and the next week. And then after a month, everyone's bored of the base ingredient.
Yeah, I think, thinking in components is kind of really useful in so many ways. Also, if you're batch cooking and freezing stuff, rather than, batch cook that chicken curry or that bean chili, if you just batch cook the tomato sauce or the curry sauce, and then you can throw in whatever you like and have all sorts of different versions, which keeps things flexible, keeps, the variety going. And I think that flexibility to just throw components together gives you that ease that, you never run out of ideas, because you don't have to come up with completely new ideas all the time. You can just work, spin off different versions.
Yeah, and then I think as you get more confident, because I know now, like when I read recipe books or I see them, it's much more for like ideas of combinations of things, but I'm not necessarily following the recipe. You think, oh, I've never thought about putting those things together in that way. We'll try that. But then I don't actually look at the book again. You sort of get those ingredients, and then it's funny sometimes because there's a salad that I make that I think, I can't remember, it's in a Gordon Ramsay book, I think, and that I saw at someone's house and I kept making, and then someone was saying, oh, that's really good, which is it? And then they got the book and it turned out to be a completely different thing. But I think I'd sort of taken the 4 or 5 things from it and then changed it so much that she was like, it's definitely not this recipe.
But that's the beauty of recipes, I find. I love recipe books, but I read them in bed like novels. and I'm taking ideas like exactly like you said. Oh, I really like this combination. I'm going to try this tomorrow. Mm-hmm. In a different context, most likely. Yes, sometimes I might cook a recipe, but even the first time I cook something, I'd probably be tinkering with something or other, just because I just always have to do my own thing.
When you start knowing what you like, it's easy then to be like, oh, I know that if I'm using this kind of sauce, I like it to have whatever lemongrass in it as well, so I'm going to put that in, even though it wasn't in the original recipe, because I know I'll prefer it better with that flavour note.
Exactly, and like you are the expert in what you like. I mean, nobody else can possibly know that better in what you like, and also what your family likes, obviously. So
yeah, and I love sharing that. Like my daughter's she's not quite 2 yet, but we're already starting. I have like a tower in the kitchen, and she loves watching me cook, but I'm already, getting her to stir things, or we do like homemade pizzas, but then because then I can give her things to put on a bagel before it goes in the oven. And like it's really fun, and you can see already that she's really interested in food, and like it's a nice bonding thing. And that's like often because it's dinner, it's the time of day when people have trouble with their kids because they're hyperactive and they want to do stuff. But actually, if you have them in the kitchen with you, and you can include them in that, it sort of solves 2 problems at once.
Yeah, that was a conversation I had with someone on my own podcast, and she was sort of saying, yeah, evenings in the kitchen are how I connect with my children. We get to empty the dishwasher together.
Yeah.
That's the thing we do together. It doesn't have to be a specific child activity. Any shared activities children are going to enjoy, because that's what they want, right? They want time with you.
Yeah, and then they learn about it. Like I think it's good for them to see, sometimes if we're making, for example, she loves sausages, so she sees them and she'll want to eat it, and then I can say to her, like, it's not cooked, and then we'll look at it before it's cooked and then look at it after it's cooked, and you can see that it's different. And I think it's just good for them to learn that early, of like, this is, you can see now this isn't ready, and then this is what it looks like when it's ready to eat, and now you can have it. But they've got to be there to learn that.
Yeah, well, exactly. This is that experience of, well, having the experience of it is how you learn. You don't learn from, cooking has become this thing you kind of learn from books, but if you just learn it in the kitchen, you don't even notice that you're learning it. I don't remember ever learning to cook. I just remember making a 3-course meal for my parents when I was 8, because it was something I wanted to do. Nobody told me to do it. I said, well, I'm going to do it. So I did it. But I don't remember ever being taught to cook. But then I was just watching my parents cook.
Yeah, same. And I came from a house where we did. I mean, I grew up somewhere that's quite similar to where you live now. So we you know, you couldn't just pop to a shop and get something if you didn't have it. You had to, very rural. We were like 20 minutes from the nearest shop, so you had to just figure it out. Okay, we don't have that, never mind. What'll do? And so, and my mum's in fact, my mum used to have a food blog and she's very into cooking. So I think that helped because you kind of grow up with that experimental, slightly, I guess, renegade attitude to trying new things.
Yeah, and why have we come to the point to think that is a renegade attitude, and why is that not, normal? Because like in times where you were depending on, growing and raising your own food, you can't depend on a certain ingredient. You just have to make food with what you have. And if you happen to have loads of cabbages, you'll be eating cabbages and pickling cabbages or whatever. And if you don't have any cabbage, then you can't do a cabbage dish, and you have to use something else.
Yeah, there was one summer actually when we were growing up where the rhubarb, it was honestly the healthiest rhubarb plant that I think has ever existed. And I reckon we ate rhubarb in every way that it's possible to have it, because it just kept on. It was so much rhubarb. Like, oh, we've got to try something new with it. We'll try this thing and this thing. Like you say, pickling it, doing all kinds of things with it. Be like, sorry guys, it's rhubarb again, but I've tried something completely different with it.
And that's another thing we have forgotten. I still run my shop, so and we have forgotten that seasonality, and we do get organic fruit and veg directly from farms, and certain things just don't exist at certain times of years. Like when there is new potatoes, there is no point in asking for baking potatoes, and the other way around. And it's sometimes of years you have like fresh little carrots that come in a bunch, and at other times of year there is only imported carrots from Holland because the UK carrots are finished. And blood oranges only last for a few weeks, and so does asparagus. But somehow that also makes it lovely, because then you can look forward to it and enjoy it while it lasts. And yes, stuff yourself with it while it lasts, and then you have to wait until the next year.
Yeah, my dad loves asparagus, and he used to grow that, and that was always a big excitement, asparagus season.
I always get really excited about things like wild garlic, and where we are here, there is these massive, endless patches of wild garlic. It's only a few weeks, but while the wild garlic is there, I mean, you don't need seasonal recipes to eat seasonal food. We eat wild garlic. Yes, we make wild garlic pesto too, but I just stick it into everything. Sometimes it's a herb, and sometimes it's just big piles like spinach. So like greens are interchangeable. For example, if you want a very easy guide for substitutions, think about substitute root with root and leaf with leaf and flower with flower, and like broccoli and cauliflower, for example, is an example of where you actually have the bud or the flower of the thing, and all the roots you can basically, they're interchangeable because they're doing something similar. They don't taste all similar, but they're doing something similar, and all the greens too.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And so then just if people are wanting to get started with kind of doing more cooking, but they're not big cooks, where do you recommend people kind of start or get going?
I think the best way to start is to make little tweaks to what you're cooking already. Like if you have like 3 meals you cook, and you want to, start with what you're cooking already and make small tweaks and notice what's happening, and notice if you like it or not. Whether the tweak is tiny by, what happens if I squeeze on some lemon juice at the end, or the tweak is bigger by saying, "Ooh, I'm going to replace the carrots with sweet potato or something." So I think, start with what you know and start tweaking it, and notice how that changes your meal. And if you're just doing small tweaks, you're not going to be lost in not knowing what you do, because you're basically, tweaking the same thing. Or, if you have a tomato sauce you like what would happen if you put different flavorings in it? I mean, a curry and a chili and a pasta sauce, it's all the same tomato sauce, you're just putting different things in it. So, that's another way of trying to look at something you're cooking. Like if you know how to cook a certain chicken curry, try to look at curry as a concept. Like, curry, what is curry really? It's an intensely flavored sauce with stuff in it. So the intense flavors are interchangeable. The base of the sauce is interchangeable. It could be tomato, it could be coconut, it could be just water and yogurt, it could be all sorts of things. And then the filling of the curry, whether it's chickpeas or fish or chicken, or again, you can play with all these components. So I think start with what you know already, what you feel comfortable cooking, and find ways of changing things around without changing everything. And, just keep that guide going until you get more confident.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it definitely is what I say to people as well on all aspects of life, is start with one small thing and see how that goes and then add to it. And it's, great advice. Thank you so much. This has been really interesting. And I think something that I know I'm having these kind of conversations with people more because it's stuff that people are interested in, but I think feel a bit overwhelmed by. And it's really nice to talk to someone who is making it very simple and just back to what people like as individuals. So I've really enjoyed this. If people want to, work with you or know more about what you do, what's the best way for them to?
Yeah, the best way to find me is my website. That's The Intuitive Cook, all one word, theintuitivecook.co.uk. And I'm on Instagram mostly at intuitive.cook. And there you can see all the different things I'm up to.
Yeah, I saw you do lots of live cook-alongs, so I feel like that's a good place for people to
Yeah,
start.
I do live cook-alongs. I do workshops. I sometimes work with people one-on-one if they kind of want to turn maybe, a meal plan or dietary restrictions into a kind of sustainable real life kind of thing. Because I think following a meal plan is all very well for a short time, but after a while you kind of don't really want to be restricted that much. And you can still follow the idea behind a meal plan without, having to follow those specific dishes, say.
Yeah, you can make it a bit more joyful.
That's another thing I do.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. This has been brilliant.
Thank you so much, Ellie. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. And great that so much of it is, is stuff you already do in your kitchen too. So
I love
talking
food.
to a fellow intuitive cook there.